Mayor Copeland is absent. Tom Baylor.
Here.
Kathy Sherman.
Here.
Jeff Guard.
Here.
Melina Meyer.
Here.
Ann Schaefer.
Here.
David Allison is absent, and David Gleason is absent for now. That is a form of council.
Thanks.
Oh, and David Gleason is here.
Where's my seat?
Right here.
But you can get some food, we all did.
I just got off work.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
did roll call.
Eat. You're in.
So I'm gonna turn it over to Helen here in a minute, but I was just gonna add a little preface. Because I went back in history, looking through this material that she gave us. And so Helen joined us in October of 2019, is that correct, Helen?
Right.
Yep. And then you were working with a draft budget prepared by an interim finance director and a former city manager. And then came 2020, and then came COVID, and then came changes in the state and federal administrations. And so I'm looking at this probably as our first quasi-normal budget with Helen. And so that's, I just went back and was thinking about that when she showed all the budget figures. But, and again, I just wanted to encourage us all tonight. I know this is, each city manager I have worked under and worked with has presented budgets differently. Everybody has their style. So I'm excited to see kind of big picture start. And I know how hard it is to get into the details, but, and Susan, I guess we're gonna turn to you and ask, it's council's responsibility to provide guidance and direction to the manager, more so than we don't deal with personnel necessarily, or I should have looked this up.
Well, adding positions, council does act on adding
Correct.
positions.
Yes, okay,
But right. Otherwise,
yeah,
budgetary.
details, we're gonna, yeah.
I guess it's not written anywhere.
Okay.
I've often heard council say. And
as
give
an
the
employee-
guidance and let the department heads and manager.
And as an employee, I always enjoyed doing the details with the manager directly, so that we were comfortable with whatever came before council. But anyway, so I wanted us all to keep in mind that this is kind of really our first budget with Helen. It's halfway in a normal year, maybe. So I'm gonna let you take over, Helen.
Great. Well, first and foremost, I want to reiterate what Kathy just described, which is that this is a new approach to how I'm presenting the budget to you all. I'm not giving you a full detailed budget because, and I think reflective somewhat of what we've just been through, we don't have a normal at the moment. We need to reestablish normal and reestablish our priorities and how we want to work. And I'm looking to council to provide guidance to me and department heads. So today's meeting, I hope, will be an opportunity for us to really look at the big picture, to provide direct guidance as to the priorities of council, and also have conversations around some different approaches perhaps to how we look at our budgets and revenue and other types of things. So just general conversation. As it stands right now, I have a draft budget in detail in my records that I've been working with department heads on. I asked them over a month ago to provide me with any major changes that they envisioned that they were going to see over the course of FY22. That would be staffing changes, major departures in the way they do business or whatever. So anything that would really significantly move the needle in their budget, I've asked them for that information, and it was provided to me. I loaded all of the information provided by department heads without any screening into a budget document, which is consolidated and in front of you. And I wanted you to see this information for two reasons. Number one, I wanted you to see that if department heads were to have all the resources they needed to do their work, we'd be looking at this moment in time, a $12.577 million budget. And given the revenue that I project based on information I've been gathering as well, we would be under revenue by a little over $2.2 million, which is a pretty big number. So as I was looking at this and starting to think about cuts, I realized that really what I wanted to do before I delved into, okay, you get to have a new position, you don't get to have a new position, is for us as you as council to have a real good conversation around how you want to approach changes in the budget, additions in the budget. You heard from the fire chief and how they might want to do things. I know Nate is sitting here today. He has some things that he wants to pursue. Library and museum have some opportunities they want to pursue. And other than drawing straws, it's really difficult for me to identify a direction without you guys' input. So that is the reason for this more higher level conversation. And I will help guide you through the things that I think are really relevant to discuss. Again, we are just coming out of two very bizarre years, and I'm including 2021 in that. So 2020, if I gave you the actual expenses for 2020, what actually happened, it would not inform what we need to do in 2022 because it was the year of COVID. We had so many unknowns, so many expenses that we weren't anticipating. Same with 2021. Come on in. Come in, there's chairs, there's a budget.
Oh, you just need.
So what I will propose, unless you guys want to do things differently, is when I present you a full detailed budget, I will be looking at 2019 actuals that are reflective of a rather normal full year, 2018 actuals that are reflective of a rather normal full year. I'll give you 2021 actuals to date, but again, it's sort of a bit of an aberration still. And then we'll be looking to FY22 as a quote-unquote normal year. So if that seems agreeable, and we don't have to decide right now, but just contemplate what kind of data you would like to have, historical data, so that will feed and inform how you want to proceed into the future. So with that said, what I'd like to do is let's talk about revenue first. If you go to the page 2 in your packet, you'll see taxes, licenses, permits, other governmental, blah, 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 for a total of $10.374 million and change. These various lines reflect our best guesstimates of where things are actually going to land. Taxes is made up of sales tax. It's made up of property taxes. We forecast out based on past revenue, what we're collecting so far, and forecasting into the future. We are looking at pretty much a lot of things staying the same, but there's some key things that are problematic. The state debt rate reimbursement, that number just has consistently gone down. Last year we had 0. This year looks like we potentially would get around 370,000. There's all sorts of unknowns on the other governmental side with state and federal sources there. Again, I've scrubbed through them and I think these are good numbers, but what I do want to talk about is raw fish tax, which is a number that we have pretty consistently just gone with whatever the state's giving us and budgeted to plug a hole. I want to average out our budget, the raw fish tax, estimated raw fish tax, so that we don't have these big aberrations in revenue from year to year, where in a year when we don't have a lot of, on those even number of years when there aren't a lot of same fish that come into play, that we aren't looking to plug a $500,000 hole in the budget rather than 100,000.
question?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. So the sales tax that we're collecting from Amazon and Target, is that coming in regularly?
Mhm.
And do you find that it's just kind of a wash because they're not buying it here, they're buying it somewhere else?
Actually, our sales tax is holding really good, and in fact, it's up a little bit. So again, I don't know where we're gonna end up in this fourth quarter for this 2021 year, and that will be a really good indicator of what it's gonna look like if we assume that there's somewhat normal spending that's happening, and maybe even really normal spending now that the COVID scene is becoming a little bit more manageable and people are getting out and there's restaurants open and activities to do.
Well,
So
that's what I was asking, because last year during COVID, there must have been 1 million Amazon boxes that came to this town. My wife was getting them
yeah,
all the time. Target,
yeah.
food, they're buying food because they don't want to get out of the house and buy food, they just want it delivered to the house.
Yeah, and we did get receipts from that, and our,
I'm just curious, did you see a rise
Yeah.
or is it just static? Because they're not buying it in Cordova, so you're losing, but then I guess at first I thought we were gonna have a windfall there, but I can see that you would just have to buy it here.
yeah.
They're just buying it, so it's.
Yeah, and some vendors still are not capturing, we're not getting every vendor that sells online, we're not collecting sales tax from them, and AML's working towards that, but definitely the big guys, the Amazons and the whomever, Targets and whatnot.
So it's just kind of staying the same though.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge increase. Maybe we'll see it this year, but I haven't seen a big number, but nor have I seen a big drop, so that's the good news. We're holding pretty well with sales tax, so perhaps that will grow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have fun.
So one of the things that I want to discuss is right now, I ran the numbers based on this year's seine fishery and the Copper River drift net fishery. Ran the numbers I received from Fish and Game, talked to processors here and have a pretty good sense that we're going to be at around $1.4 million in raw fish tax. For next calendar year, the money will not come in until November. So there's two pieces of that I think we should consider, because it makes a huge difference is how we create our budgets and what management can expect in terms of revenue. If we strictly just spend what we get, if you look to page 3 in your packet, there's a historical almost 10-year compilation of what we budgeted for raw fish tax and what the actual numbers came in. And sometimes we were right on it, sometimes we weren't. And if you look at the 2017 through 22, the first column down is the budgeted amount that we put into our approved council budget for that fiscal year. The actual amount that was received in that fiscal year, again, not until the fourth quarter, so we don't know where we're going to end up. If we were to do a 4-year rolling average, based on the preceding 4 years populating, the average of the preceding 4 years populated the next year's budget, you'll see that those numbers are, reasonably around $1.2 million. Changes as with every successive year because the 4 years populating the averages the preceding 4. If we were to budget for that, get more in and bank the difference, you would end up having money to cover the years when the raw fish tax is not going to be as great. So in the instances here, 2017, we budgeted for more than we actually received. If we budgeted based on the rolling average, first year would be a wash. The second year, if we budgeted for the rolling average, we would end up with about $290,000 surplus, which would get banked into a special fund and carried forward. So 19, there was a surplus, 2020 there was a surplus, but last year, $550,000 under what we would have wanted. But guess what? There's money in the bank, almost enough to cover it. And that kind of budgeting will allow us to always know that we are going to at least have something in the bank to cover in those bad years, but also we budget normally instead of having these big aberrations where, oh, next year we've got to cut $500,000 from the budget because we know we won't get very much. Or, hey, this year we've got a windfall, so we're going to fund all this stuff that we normally wouldn't be able to fund. So I'm proposing that this would be a really helpful management tool, not only for me and whoever occupies city government jobs, but also you as a council, and I would like for this to be considered. And with that number then would go into next year's budget, the budget that you'll be looking in the detail. Rather than having $1.4 million to play with, we would have 1.170, so about 1.2 million to play with, and it'll stabilize and level out the budgets that we look at from year to year. So I put that on the table because I think on the revenue side, it's really easy for us to take that excess raw fish tax and just plug it in and resolve a problem, but it creates a problem further down the road, potentially. So, discussion.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm definitely in support of doing that. We've talked about that as a council before, and we did it, I think 1 year, that's that $800,000 in 2018, I think was the level that was set. And that was the idea, is that we were gonna have it set, and so then when it came up above or below, it would then, cover the years that were bad, but then we'd have some extra money in the years when it's good. But then, yeah, as you said, it just becomes, when it comes to budget time and we have a budget gap we need to fill, it's an easy number to just make, it'll be higher. So it's an easy number to play with. So we just have to decide as a council that this is the plan that we want to do and we want to stick to it because it inevitably is the low hanging fruit for changing.
I think the difference between how it was approached before and what I'm
using actual
is using actual and an average. Mm-hmm. So that number will vary a little bit, but not significantly.
Yeah.
And then it banks some money. And I mean, you could bank it for use in a bad year, or it could be banked and it's like, oh my gosh, we've got this thing we have to do, and those resources could potentially be used for other things too. But I really believe that since Mother Nature is not very predictable, always predictable, I should say. She's reasonably predictable, but when you look back over time, 2021, weird year, 16 bad year, we can only assume we're going to have another one of those sometime in the future. And rather than have to be faced with a problem where we're going to have to make significant cuts in order to just balance budget, just knowing you have a little fund off to the side that can stabilize city government, that would be a real useful tool for staff.
I was gonna say, is it okay if we go round and everybody comments? But I'm gonna start with Jeff on the phone, if you can hear me. Jeff, do you have thoughts on Helen's raw fish tax proposal?
Yeah, it's kind of like Ann saying, we've been down this road once before and haven't stuck to it. It didn't last very long. But it was something we tried to do before. I don't know how we do any better sticking to it this time around, but we need to do something.
Tom, you want to go next?
Yeah, the reason it didn't work is it didn't work. We didn't have the money. And the previous manager went and cut a bunch of positions that we needed. And we ended up modifying or adjusting the budget later on to put all that money back in. So when you're short, it sounds good on paper. We want to take some money out of the raw fish tax. So where are we going to get the money when we're short on our budget? Year in, year out. I mean, usually we get that from that raw fish tax, so we find other things. So we don't have any room to tax people. We don't want to cut any more jobs. So we're already short on the budget. How are we gonna have a surplus? I guess, where are we gonna make that up?
Okay.
So I just want to be clear, because I may not have been clear, is that with a rolling average, at no point is there these big variations. And because there will always, hopefully, in years of positive catch, you'll be able to bank money. I would establish an actual fund, a fish tax fund balance that would be set into the budget as a fund, like the harbor fund or the whatever fund. And that would be a dedicated fish tax fund that would be used for those years when the resources aren't available. So then you do have money to cover those years when otherwise it's.
We're already short $2 million on your, wish list budget here, correct? Is that right? On the first page?
Right, and so one of the reasons I haven't gone farther is because I want to make sure that you don't want to, if we had a stable number, which again will run around $1.1 million that we know every year we're going to plug in the budget, and that there's a fund off to the side that we will park money into that will be available for future years, not current year. I will budget and make cuts to that wish list fund budget accordingly. If we are plugging the 1.4, which is what would be expected, that gives me more room to fund those wish lists. And if that isn't the intent of council, that you want a more stable budget, I would advise and recommend that we go with the rolling average budget number with any excess put into a fund balance that will be on the balance sheet, that will be accessed in years when there isn't enough.
So you think you can get your budget down? Right now, our revenue is $10,374,000. You think you can get your budget down to $10 million?
That number would,
That's our revenue that you said we have.
right, yeah, so 2022, if the raw fish tax number that goes in the budget is 1.170312, which is what it would be, I would need to cut $330,000 out of that budget, the expense side, to cover that, or find other revenue.
Well, I guess I'm on page 2, right?
Right,
So you got your total revenue is $10,374,000, is that correct?
right,
And then your total expenditures are $12,577,000.
right. And this
So-
is meant to just showcase the starting place for all budget conversations.
Right,
Department
I
heads, yeah.
understand that.
And so now I'm trying to fine tune the revenue side, and I want you guys to establish some of the revenue numbers so that I know how much cuts I have to do. So the next exercise I'll go through is take your guidance on where you want to put, where you want to spend money, where you want to cut money, and how you want to establish the revenue side. And then I go through with department heads a very serious exercise, and we'll get you a balanced budget for the first work session, real work session with a detailed budget next week. I just don't want to make those cuts without your guidance, and I want to be conservative on the revenue side, but not overly conservative. I just want to provide some reality that keeps us from being on a roller coaster on the revenue side.
Forgive me, I'm still not getting the answer that I can understand.
How do I cut that?
Well, look, you got $10,374,000 on your revenue.
Right,
And I understand this is your wish list budget and there's some room there, right? But still you're at 12.5.
right.
So you got $2,200,000 off. So you think you can take that $2,200,000 off plus another $300,000 off your raw fish tax for that banking and be able to present us with a viable budget?
That is my job.
Okay.
That's my job.
Do you
If you can
have,
do that, God bless you.
what's in the 10.3? You put 1.4 in that 10.3 revenue?
Yes.
You did, okay.
We'll keep going around the room. Melina?
I like the idea of doing a raw fish tax fund. It is, like we said, we've tried to do something like that in the past, but on budget years like this year, there's a big gap. We end up just tapping into it early, probably prematurely, and we haven't had an actual fund dedicated towards this. So, if I'm I'm all in favor of trying it again and trying to make it work because it has come up so many times that, I think something needs to be done with it for budget purposes, and we just have good years and bad years for that raw fish tax, and then, I think it'd help balance it out a little bit. And just like every year, there's a big gap between the revenue and expenditures, so getting those to match up is gonna be difficult, so, I look forward to your first draft.
Dave?
Since I've been on council, I haven't seen a year that we can save money. Haven't seen one of those, and maybe because of some of the things we faced, but that's like 15% of your budget you're gonna lop out of there, right? We're talking some body count there. You're not gonna save that kind of money by not buying pencils and stuff, so. I really don't want anybody to be unemployed.
I don't either, and I don't believe that that is gonna have to happen. I have identified some areas in the budget that are what I would call low-hanging fruit that can work. I think I can also accommodate some of the requests that staff has had to help increase some of the personnel or shift and modify.
Can we try to speak into the mics a little better? I'm having a hard time.
Have the mic,
I'm sorry, well, I'll
But I
talk
can
louder. Okay,
Put them a little closer.
I would just say this, is that if, as we go along here, I'm working first on the revenue side to just kind of really establish what that's gonna look like. And I wanna acknowledge that in 2018, when you guys attempted to do this, you put 800,000 in. That's a low number when you look at the average over time. So I think by increasing the average to around 1.1, 1.2, it's a big enough number that it allows us to do things and at a normal level, if you will. But rather than spending 100% of the excess, if you will, on things that we can bank it and use it for other things, or bank it and use it in years when there isn't enough. When if all of a sudden you have $728,000 received, which is this year's reality, and we budgeted $9, you know, those aren't numbers that are easy to make up. But if you have a fund off to the side where you can tap it, it becomes an easier solution. So we don't create these really hard problems. There's other revenue things that we have no control over, but the raw fish tax we can stabilize. And that is, I think, one of the things that is really most important to me is those numbers we can control, let's control them, and the ones we can't, cross our fingers and go for a ride and hope you don't crash at the bottom. So.
Well, I'm definitely not against saving money, and I think that your average is, that's a good idea. But I would love to see the cuts, and that you're saying that you'll have that stuff for us next week.
I'm looking for direction on priorities. And so on the revenue side, I just want to kind of make sure that you're comfortable with this notion, because
there isn't much there for us to.
Well, can I go?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So remember, we're big picture tonight. I like this because this is my first time doing a real full budget because I was new. I'm still trying to figure out where all the revenue comes from. I like the idea of an average for raw fish tax. I remember way before this little average sheet here, when people were betting pizzas over the number. And that's how they were coming up with it. So this, to me, makes logical sense. And we should at least try it. I love the idea of banking it away. The only thing I worry about is having a good finance department that knows to put it in the right account. But I want to say too, when I worked for the city, my first budget that the manager got was my shoot for the moon budget. I asked for everything we wanted. And that's what Helen got, and I know, you know what she got. I also had the next budget prepared that said, okay, we'll try this one. And then I had the last one, which was like, okay, here's gonna be the real budget, you know? Because I knew exactly what was gonna happen. And I have had the opportunity, when Mark Lynch resigned, to prepare a budget in under a month. And I brought a balanced budget to council, and I know what Helen's talking about. And I was given that opportunity to go through line item by line item and detail by detail with the staff, and that's how we did it. And we brought a balanced budget to the table. So I think, first of all, we've hired a very intelligent, brilliant woman who hasn't had a chance to prepare a budget yet. I've worked with managers who've done all kinds of different budgets, but the ones that work best are when we let the manager work the details out with the staff. Because that's the way you compromise and you figure it all out and you can figure out the revenue. And so I know that's what she's trying to do tonight. She's just trying to get us, if we all agree on this raw fish tax idea, then she's got one solid number she can work with. Sales tax kind of staying the same, so she's got that number she can work with. So I get this, and as a former employee, many of my co-workers have been coming to me, talking to me about the jobs, and I am interested in hearing about them, but that's not going to be my decision. That's, you know, whether Helen puts them in or not is her decision. So that's, I'm just trying to get off pizza management of budgets. Tom, who used to also do. Go ahead.
I don't think anybody's gonna say, no, you can't do that. I'm just skeptical that it can be done. And I agree with what you said. I'm more than willing to let her go for it. I'm just like, boy, that's a huge gap.
It's scary.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, no, you can't budget that. No, I'm just like, can you do it? Fine. And then, I don't want to get off topic, but at some point I'd like to have a discussion of a thought of some new revenue when you get done. Because I've got some thoughts on the permanent fund I'd like to throw out to everybody.
Anne, did you have another question?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, I'm happy to go with this for now, and I think it's a good idea, at least at this point, to plan to do that fund. I did have a question about the other revenue thing, that line for 36,000. What is that revenue? It's like really down from previous years, so I was just wondering what it was and what it reflects.
So I'll go through these. The licenses and permits, pretty basic. It's business license and whatnot. Other governmental, that is a big number, and that includes PILT, any of the government
Is that revenue sharing?
revenue sharing, all those sorts of things that come in. Any of the police departments, grants, fire departments, grants, any grants, those sorts of things. Leases and rents, self-explanatory, I believe. Law enforcement, these are where your contracts come in there. DMVs, they're planning, blah, 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 blah. Then we get down to other revenue, and these are those little catch-all things. We happen to get a little bit of money for to do a specific project. Those get lumped into there, and the state debt reimbursement is the school bond reimbursement. So again, in the future, I'll have these broken out. But again, looking at revenue, these are just our normal kind of numbers, averaged out, scrubbed a bit, but. Tom, this is where I would love to have some ideas. I'm going to share with you a few things. The library and museum are in a unique position to be able to go out and get grants, and both of them have recently received grants through the Institute of Library, Museum and Library recovery grant money to allow them to do certain things, whether it's materials, they're applying for computers and whatnot. They're even applying for staff subsidies, 50-50 match from cities. So they're in a unique position to be able to access those resources where sewer and water can't, but they can get grant funding. So with a lot of the things that we now need to focus on and need to focus on as of yesterday is with the federal infrastructure bill going to come onto the table, and it will come on. It will be resolved very soon. We need to be, and we are going to start actively looking at projects that have to be planned and designed and be ready, basically shovel ready to make those projects happen. And with those kinds of grants, there'll be a kickback to the admin side of our budget here too, because we're managing those grants, we're managing the projects, whatever it is. So there's a lot of other opportunities out there in that regard. But I would love to entertain any other notions you have. We're going to be digging under rocks looking for dollars, but yeah. And you had an idea.
Well, yeah, let me just throw it out there, and I realize for anybody says you can't do that. This would take some thought. This would have maybe change some of our policies and speak to the lawyer, but it involves a permanent fund. And I've set my own funds up to where I'm getting X amount of dollars a year from dividends. And stocks that have dividends, it's almost like a bond. So even if the stock goes up or goes down, if you're getting that dividend consistently, it creates income. So why couldn't we sit down with our finance, UBS, or hopefully somebody else, we finally talk to somebody. If we could get a pool of money coming from dividends, we should just set that money aside. The dividend money, then let's finance our school. The money that comes out of our budget. And get that targeted to our school. So, I don't know, just average, what are we paying the school every year comes?
It's, where is it here, school, it's on here somewhere.
Anybody have?
It's
Like
1.7,
last year.
1.8, I think they're asking for 2.1 this year, and that's in the budget. So those are some of those numbers, which, when I give you the detail, I'll have the ask and whatnot, but the school this year is asking for an increase.
Well, obviously, we couldn't come up with that much money, but if we could set that fund up and come up with $300,000, it would give us some relief on our city budget. It would put more of the public kind of into the, right now it's council made decision fund or not fund. This is the public's money, this is our community money, the permanent fund. If we got the okay from the public, look, we want to pull X amount to help fund schools, maybe it would fly. But if we could even generate $200,000-300,000, that helps. It's another drop in the bucket so we don't have the tax to keep coming up. But it would take some planning. We'd have to talk with some folks, but I think it's doable.
I'll get you we do have a very specific language in our charter on code, how those funds can be used. And
Right.
I'll bring that to the next budget work session.
And we may have to change some things.
Yeah,
but-
I'll get that information.
But yeah, I don't know, and then get somebody on currently UBS and see what they have to say, but we got, 9 million? Let's say you set $1 million off to the side and what that generates goes to the schools. I think the public would buy into that, but just a thought.
Yeah.
It's good though. What happens now I don't know the answers to these questions, to the UBS money? Does it must earn earnings?
It's reinvested.
And it gets reinvested?
Yeah.
Okay. So
There's-
you're talking about breaking something out?
There's two funds though right
Right.
now. There's the permanent fund and then there's the operating fund.
Right.
There's a reserve account that we collect the investment earnings that goes into that.
Okay.
So.
This is Jeff. I got a quick one here if I can have.
Sure, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I've been thinking something quasi-similar along the same lines with the permanent fund for options. But the permanent fund, we'd have to completely change, how we've been running stuff, because the permanent fund has been our slush fund, for lack of anything better to call it, when some disaster du jour happens, a shortfall, problems with the hospital budget, whatever it's been, and it's been stuff we've been drawing out of. So whether you try, and I'd be hesitant to just buy stocks and live off dividends on those because it puts you at a higher risk. You can do the same kind of stuff that the permanent fund does. And I think they're using 4%, someplace in the neighborhood of 4% payout for budgetary needs, and it still leaves them enough to inflation-proof with. But if we did that with our $9 million, it'd be like $360,000, which is a meaningful amount. It's not going to solve our problems. It's a meaningful amount, but it then ties your hands so you can no longer afford to take that money and do something else with it if a disaster happens tomorrow that you need to throw $1 million or $2 million at. So those are my thoughts there. Oh, and one other thing I got here, question for Helen. Do we have anything in here for needs of the hospital? And we have nothing in here for capital budget.
Right.
So there's still more of the budget there besides and I understand it's wish list at 12.5 million, but there's still more there that we've got coming, isn't there?
The transfer to other entities, it's a very large number. It's 2.755. I was attempting to get this all on one page. That's the school district request. That's the hospital request. Those are those big numbers that we consistently contribute.
Okay, it does have the hospital in it.
Yeah,
I knew that
yeah,
was school.
yeah.
So
those
and
basic
what are we figuring capital?
capital.
I mean, we're gonna have to have some kind of capital stuff.
Right, we're going to have a capital budget, but
Any ideas on where we might end up with that? Because those are more costs.
Right, and as, again, there's a unique opportunity with the stimulus money coming down the pike on the Build Back America plan. There's going to be substantial money, and we are going to be looking at being ready to apply for and receive those grant funds. There's going to be more money than probably projects ready to rock and roll. And I think our biggest problem with some of those projects is going to be finding people who can come and do the work, which is, there's going to be a lot of competition.
I understand that, and I think that's great, and I applaud you for that. But part of what we're trying to do here is develop a sustainable deal. I mean, I know that's been one of my things since I first got on council, is figure out what sustainable is for us and then how we can live within sustainable. So a long-term plan.
Yeah, we need, on the capital side, there will be a separate capital budget. It will include things that are just got to be done, and we're going to have to figure out revenue options for how to pay for those. At this moment in time, there are not a lot of really big any large emergency capital projects. Most of the capital projects I've seen of any size are ones that will fit into this, kind of more longer-term vision and longer-term funding opportunities coming out of the feds. But that said, there will be a separate capital budget. There'll be separate enterprise fund budgets, and then there's this general fund. And the general fund was really around identifying how we pay for ourselves. Some of these revenues, we may end up with more, and we can park it into a capital fund. And I'm refining these numbers on a daily basis, so I will have a much more detailed budget for you next week. I hope to have it done by Friday, based on this conversation today, and/or Monday at the latest. And it will be the 30-some-odd page detailed budget, which you guys can go through. And every revenue fund will be identified separately, so you'll have that information detail.
Okay. Okay, well, I thank you very much for everything you've been doing so far. Anyway, that's all the questions I have right now. Thank you.
So without any instruction to the contrary, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'll prepare the budget with the FY22 proposed rolling average number, which is 1.170312. Again, the revenue expected in is around 1.4. So we'll potentially, if those numbers come to fruition, we'll be banking some money at the end of next year for the following year's use at this time. And if it doesn't come through, we won't have it over budgeted. We won't be looking at hopefully more than we're going to get. So, no objections there? everyone's, I'll just present it, and you guys can talk about it when you put the, things together. There's a couple of pages that we just graphed out where the revenue was. We adjusted it for CPI, so these are real dollars, and our revenue is 25% down from where it was in 2014, adjusted. On the expenditure side, we're tracking a little bit downward. I wanted to just point out that aberration in 2019 was the CCMC big contribution we made to pay for the,
Tank removal?
yeah. So that is the anomaly of going up that large in 2019 was that over $1 million that we made contribution to CCMC to dig them out.
That was not the tank, that was,
PERS and
PERS.
the tank was this year, right?
Yeah, and they paid for it out of the $300,000 contribution that we gave them for this calendar year. This budget, so you know, has $600,000 in for CCMC because that's what they asked for, but they probably can make do with 300. So there's some wiggle room there, and we'll just see how that goes. I think, and this gets back to what Tom was just saying, we have to find other revenue sources. We don't want to keep taxing folks to death, but we can't. We hear from people all the time, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? Why aren't you doing this? And it gets down to people power, and city government is powered by people. And we can only do as much as the people who we're employing can do. And I don't believe for a minute that anyone's just sitting around idly and not doing their jobs. I think everyone's working really, really hard. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that this budget is based on people. And every time we have to make significant cuts, it's going to come, like you say, in people. And we're trying to avoid that. And we're trying to provide the services that city residents are expecting of us and do it in a way that works. So we'll see how that goes. Want to talk a little bit to...
Yeah, just, I think when you get down to breaking down into your weeds in the budget there, I think I'd sure like to make sure that you had money for the city assessor. You know, said it was gonna cost more, but that's gotta be done, especially after realization going through that last meeting. So I just, when you start your pencil, make sure you got a line item in there that we can move forward with that.
Yeah.
We definitely need to know what land.
I have some fun ideas that I'm going to bring to you next week. So,
Come on, may I ask a quick question? When is the union negotiations?
now,
Oh, okay. Lovely, budget and CBA.
so as promised, we will bring anything to you before anything's inked. And we're in the very early stages of that, but we have begun.
We got shelled in the last one, so they should be happy for a while.
The other, go
Can I
ahead.
just ask, do you guys want to have a discussion item? I mean, do you think that you're gonna wanna change charter on permanent fund? Because if we are, I'd need to do that by December to put it on March's. So I was thinking maybe at the next week's meeting, we could just have a discussion item about that part of charter.
Yeah.
And at least we can talk about what you might be thinking.
Yes.
And
There's
what's
a
allowed.
lot to be flushed out there.
Well, I know.
I don't know
but
if it
if the
works.
charter needs to change,
Yeah.
I hate to wait an entire year, because then it wouldn't even affect till 24's budget.
Well, we could start the process at least.
Yeah, I think we can have a good conversation, at least give you guys a sense of the playing field, what we can and cannot do, where we stand, and all that good stuff. So, the governor the other day, he was in town, he said we're getting 50% for school bond reimbursement. The number I got from Department of Ed was 42% school bond debt, so it's still questionable, but if we're lucky that 8% extra will be on the table for us to use, so that'll be very exciting.
So, excuse me, Helen, is the number in here, is that the 42% number?
And you're saying it's gonna go up one?
Governor said 50.
He said it 3 times.
He said it multiple
He
times.
said it 3 times.
Yeah.
Well,
He like
We're all
volunteered it
listening.
multiple times.
50% of the 100%
I'll
we're
leave it
Right.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm fact checking that, but if that is indeed the case,
Did anyone
that,
get him on video saying that?
Yeah, it was recorded.
Not
Play it
allowed to
back.
record anything when he's around.
so there's some other revenue things that I'm trying to confirm up, and I'll make sure that those numbers are as clear as the muddy waters that we live in when you guys look at this next week. So I will finalize those numbers. I will put the little less amount for raw fish tax. And again, I could give you any number, right? Didn't we do that last year? I said 728, and I would have won, because
Pizza.
I would have won a pizza, come close.
No, there's nobody to make it.
Okay, now the other thing that I wanted to have a conversation with, and this is where these graphs, and I'm going to talk through this a little bit. So I've done some work, went to the Urban Institute and other places that are statisticians, and kind of looked at how do our departments line up in terms of percentage of budget allocations to the various departments. And we're actually doing really good. If you look at these pie charts, in general, the ideal numbers for, city administration is around 10%, library museums around 7%, parks and rec around 6% of the full budget, public works 13 to 15%, public safety 13 to 15%, schools 20% were under there. So I actually just kind of went and mined what other communities are doing, because I know that's always a question, is like, where do you put your money? So assuming that we're allocating reasonably close, maybe a little under, maybe a little over in some places, that doesn't mean we have to allocate that way. But what would be a helpful tool as we look at our budgets is having council identify priorities. So if there's increases, your department's going to be static, but your department, we're going to give you an increase. Thinking in terms of percentage of wholes rather than, and the relationship of those percentages to a total budget is another approach to doing it. It's a starting place. So I went through an exercise and kind of established what those numbers look like in the budget that you're looking at. What department heads are bringing to me may significantly change those numbers. And your job is to help us decide where you want to invest money, where you want to go over, or where you feel like we're doing okay, or where you think, no, I don't care what the national average is for, support of XYZ department. I don't think we should go there. But I think it's a useful way of approaching the budget, rather than looking at just, tweaking $100 here, $1,000 there, or whatever. So with that in mind, I pulled the comp plan because I think it's important for us to remember what the citizens asked for. And I can make sure, if all of you don't have a copy, we have multiples downstairs, and I can make sure you all have this just as a refresher. But housing is one of the key things that the community is struggling with and has asked us to resolve. I've tasked Curtis Fincher, who's our communications person, pretty much about 70% of his time is now going to be focused on housing and trying to figure that out, and working with partners and trying to address that. So I'm going to be focusing departments on issues of importance to community, and that's something that I can do to help make sure that you guys are seeing things accomplished that are of importance to the community without adding added expense. So that is something that I'm working on.
So just a comment on the housing, and I would agree with you, but I listened to your joint work session on planning and zoning. At no point did council say, our priority is housing, don't sell any more lots, residential lots, unless you're gonna be for single-family housing. Instead, next week, we got one for a garage, or a storage shed. So it's there, we all know it. Council needs to give direction to the planner and to the planning and zoning commission to say, leave these lots for residential housing, because at some point they will get used up. But we're not doing that. Yeah.
So housing is certainly one of the things. There was, questions around land use, those both directly relate to planner and some of those uses of our budget. But just to run down what people value the most: sense of community, access to outdoor recreation, family-friendly, natural resources, access to subsistence opportunities, beautiful landscapes, quality schools, volunteers, commitment to community, support for local businesses, and history and culture. So those are key values that they have. And you start hearing, okay, we're safe, we have history, culture, we have museum, library, we have abundance of natural resources, places to play, all those sorts of things. So parks and rec, we have schools, quality schools, we start hearing these kinds of things bubbling up as values that the community seems to express. And how do we turn those values then into how we craft our budget is a key thing that I keep wrangling with, and would love to have a little bit of guidance from you. If we put money into things, where do you want us to put money into at this moment in time? What are the priorities of council? If I had an extra little nest egg, what are we talking about? We've heard from the fire department that there was a need for additional resources. That could be the priority. And maybe you want to see all of the options and see how they play out and then make your decisions. But it would be helpful to have a sense of where you all stand on the new opportunities that have presented themselves through conversations you've seen over the last couple of months.
Councilman Schaefer.
Well, I would say, a lot of those values were about like outdoor recreation and sense of community and, family values. And I know I have some questions about the Parks and Rec budget that was like costs and stuff here, but I know Parks and Rec, their budget positions were cut, 2014-ish, 15-ish, and it's like they've never really recovered. We don't have camps in the summer anymore, and the after-school programming for kids, and so I think that's been a big loss, and that's been a gap that other entities have, tried to fill. But I do still see that as a gap, and we need more youth programming from our Parks and Rec department.
That was one of those things that got the chopping block when we balanced the raw fish tax,
Yeah.
which didn't make sense, but in order to do that, that's what had to go. So.
I was just gonna say, my personal priority would be as close to full funding for the school as we can. But I think we need to, it's important to maintain city services, safety. Those are things that just shouldn't be cut. I agree with Ann, Parks and Rec has already taken a big hit and never recover from. I have strong feelings, of course, about the library and museum, but I also know how much available grant funding there is out there for them. And the museum also has the Cordova Historical Society. So, as much as I love those two entities, and they're always low-hanging fruit, I would put them lower on my little list, just because I know there's other avenues. But for me, I'm happy to see the hospital kind of coming more into the black. and they're not draining us so much. And I just feel, I've been listening to Mr. Rustin speak to the governor about how many kids are here that could be benefiting from preschool. And, you know, to me, that's just, we're investing in our community if we can do that.
Yeah, I like the fire department, and definitely the school. I mean, you can't really call yourself a town without having those things, and I do think people, you know, they're saying they like to feel safe. Well, that comes at a cost. You have police, you have the fire department, and those are volunteers, which are really low right now. And Paul's asking for some paid positions so that he can have ambulance drivers. So imagine no ambulance service there. You know, I've seen them in action several times. So to have ambulance service is a big deal. And you gotta pay for it. And the state troopers have been shooting away bears like crazy. They're all over the place.
Shooting?
Shooing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're coming up there shooting with rubber bullets, trying to get rid of them.
I talked
make them leave, but
with the gal with Fish and Game whose name I just spaced. Charlotte, yeah. She would like to do a presentation to council at some point around the bears and talk about the mitigation. You're probably well involved in that, but she wanted to come and chat with us about bears, if you're interested.
And has a question.
Do these budget numbers include those extra positions?
Yes, they're fully loaded.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
does it also include the impound lot project? Or is that with one of the capital projects?
That's a
That would be-
capital.
Okay.
That's all. So this is strictly the operating budget. And in the future, the operating budget will only include those things that are just kind of our normal, this is what we need to survive, this is what we need to do our normal work, and anything that is outside of that will have a separate either capital or project budgets, just so that you know how they work.
Oh, hold on.
Usually we have a ski hill, an expense for the ski hill. Is that included? Or is
Yes,
that just
it's in there.
under
Any of the
something?
grants that go out for
Community college.
community college, the chamber, that's included, everything's included in this budget.
Just forgot the question. New revenue. So anywhere in there, I mean, I've been working the conference for the last 3 days. Do you have Cordova Center revenue built in?
Just what we were given last year's budget plus a little bit. I think there was another $5,000 or $10,000 budgeted for next year.
In terms of revenue?
It's supposed to be an other, but
Yeah, it
the other
is.
went way down.
Well,
Yeah, the other one.
I'm-
I think it may have gotten put in another
Somewhere
It's all there. It's just maybe mixed in.
Well, I was just curious because, you know, we had this meeting, which was great. We had Board of Fish cutting up. And I haven't looked at 2022 schedule yet, but at least we're starting to bring in some more money again from the center. So, I don't know, we're still trying to generate revenue.
Yeah, and coming out of COVID is just, you know, we're trying to be realistic because people are still nervous about travel.
Right.
not really.
AFN canceled.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about travel.
AFN canceled their in-person. I'm speaking in terms of conferences and
Conferences
meetings.
and-
Yeah,
Yeah.
AML still happening
I think
in
so.
person?
And these guys who are meeting here for the electric co-op, they had originally between 75 and 125. They ended up with, we had 70 the first 2 days, but quite a few, 30 to 40 people did cancel out because of fear of COVID and the outbreak in Alaska. But still, it was a nice, good number, and they were very good about wearing the mask.
But did we ever look at the revenue versus expense with them? We talked about that once, and I think COVID hit us. What are we charging? Are we charging enough? And, you know, I think we were gonna look at that and then things went to hell,
Yeah,
but
and one of the things that we've talked about is separating the Cordova Center from, as its own unit, so you can really see, this is the revenue, this is, instead of having it buried, which means having assigned staff too, but right now it's in the museum budget. And so we're working on cleaning things up so it's more transparent for your decision-making.
What was it intent, what was our original idea of how much money we were gonna make a year renting? It was like $500,000, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't that high, but we, before I retired, our highest number, I think, was about 55,000. No, yeah, 55,000, I think, was our highest year.
We're not charging that.
But it kept continuing to grow.
We can have some cool stuff here. Gun show.
So we have had, but we've lost
You gotta be able to feed them.
both. Yeah, we gotta get rid of COVID.
no, I mean, you gotta be able to feed them.
Yeah, well, it was a very difficult thing for this conference. And I'm not quite sure how Board of Fish is getting fed,
And
so.
leave those guys on their own.
Then we need to feed them to make them happy.
Yeah, we don't have a holiday gas station where you can go get a hot dog and a slushie at all hours.
I'll cook for the Board of Fish.
I would prefer to see the Cordova Center separated out myself, and I know Mimi and I talked numerous times about the rates and the fees, and we've learned a lot, so that is something that definitely could be reviewed. And the staff timing, well, I mean, I worked it, I didn't get paid, but there were people who got paid. We were doing 12-hour days. So.
That has to be in the calculus, all the volunteer time, because it is a cost, and eventually, as we're seeing with our fire department, eventually it catches up with you. There was one restaurant in town that did provide food though, right?
Yes, there was.
Didn't mean to throw everybody
No.
under the bus.
No, the Reluctant Fishermen catered, and they just wowed them with local seafood, just wowed them. And then Witch's Kitchen, Kayak Cafe, Little Cordova Bakery. So Stabbard was in charge, and he did a very good job of spreading the wealth around the caterers. It was really good. There were so many compliments on the food from everybody.
So, on page 1, right on the bottom, you've got the last sentence, where staff recommends looking into the future with a condition assessment of all city assets to determine repair, replacement timeline. Yeah, I would agree, but I would assume that all your department heads are doing that on their own. I hope we're not talking about hiring somebody. Because the guys down at the city shop, I see them constantly upgrading and doing things, so I'm assuming they can give you assessment. I would hope the water department can give you assessment. I would hope the museum people can.
I think there's the assessment of things that people can assess because they work with them all the time. And then there's buildings. It's like we have an issue apparently with this building already, not even 10 years after, I don't know, how it opened to 15?
Yeah, 6 years.
Yeah, there are things in this building that need to be replaced or upgraded or changed or whatever. And I don't think anybody necessarily knows what those are. If things need to be engineered and understood, building condition, we will have to hire somebody. But for the average stuff that we have, people know what they are. Malvin knows a lot of stuff already. But when I say condition assessment, I think we rely on departments to bring stuff to us, but they're only looking at what they know and not necessarily the bigger picture. Our building, like we've talked more than once about replacing the public safety building. I don't expect Nate or anybody down there to have a condition assessment of that building to say, okay, it's got, one more year because the roof's going to go or whatever, or the heating system's about ready to blow or whatever. So we've never really done that very deep dive into the assets that city owns, and I'm going to ask people to do that. And for the most part, we won't have to pay for that, but I think there may be some instances where we do. And in the instances where we did pay for that, it would be to line us up to access those federal dollars for major replacement. So that's
building inspector now.
Yeah.
Then you need enforcement.
So essentially, this is just a really, as I say, general overview. I just wanted some general guidance. Does anyone have any thoughts around priorities that, you know, you want to make sure I heard? I don't know that I heard from everyone around their priorities. Dave, Kathy, Ann, Melina.
You gotta have city services, you gotta have the police, you gotta have the fire department, you gotta have school.
Yeah, when I got this list, I hit my yellow marker and I said, all right, law enforcement, fire EMS, public works, snow removal, equipment maintenance, pool. Just went, okay, those are all necessary. Everything else is on up for discussion, you know. I mean, you basically have to have those things to have a community. Now, I didn't see school in there, so I didn't highlight it.
It's in there.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's, I mean, that's just a quick, like, all right. But that's your job now, so I'm not gonna get in the weeds.
You know, Parks and Rec has asked for a fairly significant increase for a couple of things. For one, we don't have any lifeguards, trained certified lifeguards for our pool. That puts us as city in jeopardy with liability insurance. And so, you know, if we want to have a pool, which I know the schools do, we don't charge the schools for the pool, but it's an important part of their physical education program, but also just we're a waterfront community. We need all of our kiddos to know how to swim. So, so there's, you know, some of the things that we do cross departments. So the school needs the pool needs the lifeguards to make the pool happen for the school, and you know,
So let's
it's
train
sort of
some
like
school kids to be lifeguards. We've done that in the past.
yeah. So one of the things that's in here is training for that, and then to have those trained individuals be on staff, whether they're teenage kids that are 16 years old and looking for after school work or not, but then they move on and do other things, and so we have to develop a program that keeps that pool in a place where we can safely operate. So there's things like that we're just trying to resolve. And I will also say, and I did put it in my thing, is that there were 2 positions that weren't funded that I said, let's look at first quarter, and then there was no revenue because we didn't know what we were doing. But HR is a real burden not to have someone on staff devoted. Right now, Laura Cloward is on contract to help me out. We got, 70 people working for city, and there's lots of personnel issues that inevitably come up. And notwithstanding the CBA negotiations that we're in the midst of now. So I do not want to subject our employees or staff to the absence of someone who's really managing the HR function for city. That's really critical.
Is that HR position included under the city manager
Yes.
part? Okay, I
Yeah.
saw that an increase
Yeah.
there and I was wondering what it was. Okay.
I'll have all that detail.
Yeah.
And then back to the Parks and Rec piece is like right now there's basically, they're opening doors, and that's pretty much all they can do in maintaining the buildings. But there is no programming involved. So I will put in the budget that opportunity for you guys to discuss and to see if I can't make something work budgetarily. And you'll have the opportunity to look at that in detail, again, budget detail for next week. So.
Well, the lack of HR has cost us a lot of money in the past, even though the position was filled. The lack of actually doing the job.
Yeah.
Can it be rolled into, well, it's your, but I mean, I know what other co-ops, it's kind of rolled into other positions. Or do
Yeah.
you think it has to be specifically just HR?
No, I mean, in fact, the position itself as it stands is HR and grants. And we've moved some things around and said that HR position could provide additional support to other departments, and possibly even floating to help with grants and other duties as assigned.
You just have to know how to do grants, deal with insurance companies, and a whole bunch of this.
70.
It's a piece of cake.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. This whole COVID thing was really complicated too, because people needed different supports than they would have normally, so. Okay, well, I think I have some general direction. I'm going to proceed and get you a budget detail. But if you need any specific information or have some ideas, just at this point, I'm just doing 24/7 budget. It's swimming in my brain.
Well, unfortunately, I may actually be here next Wednesday.
No.
The weather is terrible.
Oh, you were just supposed to be here.
And it's supposed to blow 60 Friday night, 50 all day Saturday. You can't,
Great weekend.
No.
can't hardly be anchored.
And did you have a question?
So, if it doesn't improve, I'll be here.
Well, that's good.
We'd be happy to have.
So we are doing the next one, next week, Wednesday at 6 before the regular meeting at 7. She'll be back in a normal place. Okay.
You said in the next iteration of the budget you present, you're gonna include 2019 as the comparison year, kind of? It's good to have just.
Yeah, I'll do
kind of touch
18 and
point.
19.
Okay.
Just so you have 2 years of
And then that,
kind of normal.
yeah,
I just don't even want to deal with 20 and even 21. 21's not complete yet, but 20 is
Yeah.
just crazy.
okay, yeah,
It's
just to
scary.
make sure.
Yeah.
I may or may not be here next week.
Okay.
I might be out for work.
But I will get you those numbers. I got it pretty much set. I just wanted your feedback on some things. I'm going to just do my best, and if and departments, I'm going to work directly with departments to just really refine these over the next few days. So, and there will be changes as one would expect.
Thank you.
And if anyone has a firstborn child that's really cute that they want to sell to prop up the budget, let me know.
Susan, do I gavel, do we adjourn?
You can just say,
Thank you. We're done. Thank you.
Oh,
Are we done?